Hello and welcome to briefing number 7 in this series on marketing for charities brought to you by the Worshipful Company of Marketers. My name's Peter Rees and again it's my pleasure to be your host and narrator for today's briefing, in which we'll cover the second part of our discussion on strategy. I'll start as usual with a summary of the points I'm going to cover in today's briefing. The first thing I'm going to do is give you a quick revision of the area of strategy that we talked about in the last briefing, which was the area of segmentation. I'll then talk about the two following strategic approaches, which are targeting and positioning. I'll explain those in the sections as we get to them. I'll then wrap up today's briefing with a discussion of branding and how charities can develop a strong brand to create remembrance and recollection in the mind of their target stakeholders and to provide competitive advantage in the marketplace. I'll then talk about the things we're going to cover in the follow-on briefings and remind you how questions can be answered. I'll then conclude as usual with some final remarks. I'll start by reminding you where we've got to in our strategic marketing planning journey. From the model we're using, you can see we're on the third step. We've covered the area of situation analysis, which answers the question, where are we today? We looked at how to set objectives, which answer the question, where are we going? And to remind you, strategy answers the question about how we will get there. Strategy is the area of marketing planning that helps you decide how you'll achieve the objectives that you've set. And then in later briefings, we'll go on to cover the next three areas of tactics, actions, and control. I'll move on then in this briefing just to give you a quick revision and review of the area of strategy that we discussed in the last briefing. In the previous briefing, we covered the following areas. The first thing we looked at is how one might answer the big question, which, if you remember, is what is it that makes your charity better and different from your competitors, that in ways that add value to and are valued by your target stakeholders that can't be easily copied. And one of the techniques we then followed on from that is looking at which product markets the charity is operating in. And in this case, we looked at a model called the Ansoff matrix, which defined the 4 strategies concerned with new and existing products and new and existing markets. And if you remember, we identified 4 strategies, which were market penetration, market development, product development and diversification. I gave you a worked example of a case study about a bereavement charity in Richmond to give you an idea about how that model worked. We then looked at the next area, which was segmentation. And segmentation, if you recall, is all about identifying groups of target stakeholders with common wants and needs that can be satisfied with the same offer. So that's where we've got to so far. In this briefing, I'm going to follow on from those discussions and look at the 2 follow-on steps after segmentation, the first one of which is called targeting. So having segmented the market, we then decide in the targeting step which market segments are attractive to us and which target stakeholders are we going to build offers and communicate with. The final step is called positioning, and that is the concept whereby we position our offers to demonstrate to the target stakeholders the value that we're going to deliver and position ourselves and differentiate ourselves from other competitive offers in our target market. So this final stages of segmentation, targeting, position really round off and complete our discussion on strategy. So let's start by looking at the first of these new areas, and that is targeting. In this section on targeting, we're going to look at and make decisions about which target markets, which market segments we're going to serve and support. In the area of targeting, one has 3 options, and it's important to recognise, sometimes my students don't recognise, that you need to decide and choose just one of these 3 following options. The first is, having done segmentation, we actually decide that the whole market wants the same thing. There are in fact no segments in the market. Everybody in the population wants the same offer, and therefore the charity will build just one set of offer and that will be offered to everybody. And such a targeting approach is called undifferentiated. Now, it's highly unlikely in most charity markets that an undifferentiated approach would work, because if you think about the different stakeholder groups, which are donors and sponsors and beneficiaries and volunteers, it's unlikely that all of those stakeholder groups want exactly the same thing. The second approach that one can use is shown here, and this is called a differentiated approach, and this is much more likely for most charities. So it's options 2 and option 3, which I'll come to in a minute, are going to be the most likely approaches for a charity. If you go after option 2, as you can see here from this diagram, the charity has done some work. It's segmented the market and identified 3 different market segments, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3 on this diagram, and has gone ahead and produced a different offer for each one. And such an approach is called differentiated targeting. The final option for targeting is shown here, and this is called a concentrated targeting strategy. And in this case, the charity has identified 3 different target segments, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, but decided that for the moment it's only going to produce offers and serve and support one of them. So that's the third option. You have 3 options in total: undifferentiated, differentiated and concentrated. On the concentrated option, in this example, the charity today has decided only to produce an offer for segment 1, but that's not to stop it expanding and perhaps in years to come develop an offer for segment 2 and possibly segment 3. But the point about concentrated strategy is that you don't produce an offer for all of the segments that you've identified. On this slide, I'm going to give you some practical advice based on years of experience in charities on how to target effectively. The first thing to point out, and I guess you would probably have realised, that targeting can only work after you have completed a proper market segmentation. You can't decide a targeting strategy until you have identified the target segments which you might possibly develop an offer for. In terms of developing offers, this second point I make here is really based on my experience of working with charities over the years. And the fact is that many charities have not actually done proper segmentation, have really got to where they are today almost by accident. They have not segmented the market efficiently, or sometimes at all, and they've therefore developed random offers over time on an almost ad hoc basis to target relevant stakeholder groups. And this has some consequences for the costs and the resources within the charity. Because the fact is, of course, the more segments that you target, or the more offers that you develop to deliver to serve those targets, or the more offers that you develop even if you haven't segmented the market, it increases the amount of resources you will need within your charity, and your costs are likely to be higher. So having lots and lots of offers may be a good thing if it's done in a planned and controlled way, but in many cases charities have a whole range of offers, most of which, or many of which, are not relevant and hardly used today, but they're still on the website, they're still in the literature of those charities, and just maintaining them uses up resources and, more importantly, costs. And the final point I'll make is just refer to point 2. So make sure that your portfolio of offers is done on a properly planned basis. You've done proper market segmentation, you've decided which segment you're going to target using the targeting step that I've just described, and only once you've done that should you be in a position to decide which offers you need to develop that will create value and add value and answer the big question for those stakeholders in those target segments. Following on from the discussion then, this is the action step that I recommend that you take to make sure that you're targeting successfully. The first thing, obviously, is you need to complete your segmentation as described in the previous briefing. So think about how you might segment each of your target stakeholder groups, and this might include stakeholders in the areas of donors, sponsors, beneficiaries and volunteers. Once you've done that segmentation, decide which ones you're going to target and which ones you're not going to address or serve at the moment. It might be time to have a look at your current portfolio of offers and see if you can identify any costly or marginally effective offers, and it may be time to delete those from the services that you provide to your target markets. So for each stakeholder segment, decide which offers you will create and deliver, and this will be the subject of the next 3 briefings when we get onto the area of tactics. So this is just a call to action to really analyse and perhaps spring clean your current portfolio of offers and go through the stages of segmentation and targeting again to the different stakeholder groups, and make sure that the offers you have on the books are the most effective, that add value to your target stakeholders, and ones you can deliver in a sustainable and cost-effective way. Once you've completed these steps, then it's time to move on to the third step in the segmentation, targeting and positioning sequence, and this is looking at ways to position your offers in the marketplace to the different target stakeholders so they can clearly be seen to be better and different in ways that are valued by and add value to those target stakeholders. If you'd like to think about it this way, positioning is all about being better and different, and really it goes back to the big question is, what is it that makes your charity better and different from your competitors in ways that are valued by and add value to your target stakeholders that can't be easily copied? And positioning is all about presenting your offers to your target stakeholders in ways which clearly answer and demonstrate your capabilities in answering this question. I'll start off this section with a discussion of one model by our friend Professor Michael Porter called the Porter's Competitive Advantage Model, and this is version 1. I'll talk about version 2 on the next slide. And Michael Porter said essentially there are 3 ways for an organisation to maximise its value and maximise its return, or in commercial organisations maximises the profit it gets from a particular target market. And these are the 3 areas and the 3 options that Michael Porter identified. First of all, there's an option called the low-cost producer, and this means that you can develop and deliver your products and services more cost-effectively than your competitors. You can produce your offers at a lower cost than your competitors. Now, the thing to think about here is, although you might be able to produce your products or services or offers at a lower cost, it does not mean you have to offer them in the marketplace for the lowest price to the consumer. So in the case of charities that develop offers and deliver them to your beneficiaries, you should strive in this option to produce those offers at the lowest cost base that you can. It does not mean you have to charge the lowest price if you're gaining revenue from them when you deliver them to the beneficiaries. The second source of competitive advantage that Michael Porter identified is one that's, in my opinion, going to be more relevant to charities, which means that you're differentiated from your competitors, which means that your products or services, your offers, provide better value and are valued more highly by your target stakeholders than those of your competitors. It's all about being better and it's all about being different. And if you remember those words, we've talked about that being better and different on lots of previous sections in this and previous briefings. And in my opinion, this is one of the 2 of the most likely competitive advantage options that charities would focus on. The third option is being a niche player. And this is saying that you decide to not serve the wants and needs of all of the whole market. You just go over a particular target segment. So if you're a medical charity, you don't try and offer medical relief to all possible sufferers of this charity. You focus on one particular area. It might be children or older people or in a particular geographic area. So there are 3 options that Michael Porter identified for sustainable competitive advantage: producing your products and services at a lower cost to your competitors, being better and different from your competitors, or just serving one small part of the total market. The point about this model is that Michael Porter said, once you've identified these 3 possibilities, you should just focus on one of them. Focus all your efforts on being the low-cost producer, or focus all of your activities and your marketing thought on being better and different, or focus on all of your marketing effort and focus on just serving one particular part of the market exceptionally well. Michael Porter said if you don't do any of these particularly excellently, you're what he called stuck in the middle. You're not the lowest cost producer, you're not significantly different from your competitors, and you're not serving one particular area of the market and being seen as the leader in that particular market segment. And he called this position stuck in the middle. Now the fact is, in most industries, most businesses are in fact stuck in the middle. So if you think about the charity market or the car sector, or banks or insurance companies or fashion retailers or chemists or media companies, most people in most markets are neither the low cost producer, they're not better or significantly different from their competitors, and they're not just focusing on a particular niche part of the market and doing exceptionally well. If an organisation is stuck in the middle, it doesn't mean it's going to go out of business, because as I've said, in most markets this is the position that many companies occupy. It just means that they're not going to maximise the financial results and the financial performance of their organisation. So this is version 1 of the competitive advantage model. On the next slide, I'm going to go into a later refinement of it, which I think is more relevant, and I'll just stress again the options which I think are most relevant in this second version of the model for charity marketing. Here's the second version of the competitive advantage model, and Michael Porter's refined it into the preferred 2x2 matrix loved by marketers. And he said there are two axes. You could either across the top have a cost focus or a differentiated focus, and you could have that focus either for the whole market or for one particular niche part of the market. So this comes up with a 2x2 quadrant. So charities need to decide if they're going to be option 1, option 2, option 3 or option 4. And again, if you're doing none of those exceptionally well, as I've described on the last slide, you're effectively stuck in the middle. Now, in my opinion, I think that it's probably most appropriate for most charities to focus on being differentiated. Deliver your products and services in ways that add value to and are valued by your target stakeholders more effectively and better than your competitors with a small c. And then once you've made that determination that you're going to have a differentiation strategy, you need to decide, having done your segmentation and targeting activities, which I've now outlined to you, whether you're in strategy 2 or strategy 4, whether you're going to be a differentiated charity for the whole market, or whether you're just going to serve particular segments or niche parts of the market. You have a concentrated targeting strategy exceptionally well. So in my opinion, for most charities, one would need to focus on strategy 2 or strategy 4 on this diagram of the second version of Porter's competitive advantage model. Moving on then, let's look at the marketing model we use particularly for positioning. I've talked about positioning several times up until now, but I haven't actually shown you the model that most people use to do positioning, and it's called a positioning map or positioning maps, and it works like this. This model helps you to understand how you will position yourself so that you're different from your competitors, and you can clearly demonstrate this in your communication and in your marketing to your target stakeholder group. So it's all about being better and different from your competitors in ways that add value to and are valued by your target stakeholders. You need to understand what are the things that add value or are valued to by each stakeholder group. And I talked about that way back in, I think, lecture 3 or 4 of this briefing series when we talked about market research. And I gave you the methodology to do surveys and interviews with people to identify the things about your charity's offer which they find valuable and which adds value to them. So if you don't remember that, go back to the section on market research. Once you've identified those things, you need to compare these in different combinations and map how you and your competitors deliver against those criteria. And then you need to look at the places where you stand apart from your competition or places where you can move to in order to stand apart. And I'll give you the following example. Looking at this, it's a bit complicated, it's hard to visualize. So on the next few slides, I'll give you a worked example of how this operates in practice. I'll start by outlining the basic approach to this process, and then on the next slide, identify the basic mistake that many people make, and then on the slides after that, I'll show you how to do it correctly. So the basic approach is to think of 2 criteria that might be important to your target market. So the example that's taught in all business schools and the one you see in all textbooks is the following. It says you have some offers and you can compare them to your competitors against 2 criteria, the quality and the price. So you can have a low quality or a high quality offer, and you can bring it to the market at a low price or a high price. And what people tend to do is the following, and this is the basic mistake they make. So think of a market, whether it's charities or food retailing or fashion or banking or insurance, whichever market you're in, map you versus your competitors against these 2 basic criteria. So if you did that, you could say the red circle in these diagrams is your charity or your business. So you could say you're doing an above average quality and you're above average price. You're not super high quality, you're not super low quality, but this is where you are positioned on this map. And then what you do is then plot in where your competitors fit in. So you've got other competitors who operate and occupy these positions according to these 2 criteria. So you've got the yellow competitor on the top right, who's a high quality, high price, perhaps a luxury premium brand, and you've got a blue competitor on the bottom left, which is a value brand, low price and relative low quality, and you've got a middle of the road green competitor, which is sort of middle range quality and middle range price. And that is where most people stop. When this is taught in business schools, and this is the sort of presentation that many students and many charities without experience, they'll just do this one-off chart. They'll do one chart against two criteria, and they'll position their charity against some others, and that's it. No commentary, no strategic thought, and they just do this, put it on a piece of paper and move on to the next step. And if I was marking this again at a university, I'm afraid I would give it no points, because it adds no value. It doesn't really use the full strategic potential of the concept of positioning maps and what they enable you to do. So on the next few slides, I'll explain how one might do and use positioning more effectively and in a more strategic manner. I'll show you how positioning maps should be used properly using this case study example. Imagine for a moment that you represent a charity which offers counselling and support services to former British service personnel with post-traumatic stress disorder and related mental and physical health issues. And this case study is based on a charity exactly like this that I worked with some years ago. In fact, I've done work for two charities in this particular area. The first thing you need to do is to research what is important to your beneficiaries. And let's assume that for the purposes of this positioning map, we're talking just about your clients. So for the beneficiaries, for the client of this charity providing relief for former service personnel, having done the research, they've identified that there are a number of points which are really important for their target beneficiaries. The first one is, how much does the service cost? Is it available for free? Is it subsidised? Or does the beneficiary have to bear the full cost of the service? Are there flexible appointments? Can they get seen over the weekend? Can they get seen out of office hours, if you like? Is the particular offer personalised to each individual target beneficiary, or is there just one standardised offer which all people have access to? Can they get support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? And as well as the counselling and advice services that are provided, is there a safe space they can go to, a place of safety where they can get out of sort of mainstream life and just sit quietly? There's one charity that I worked with which provided support for service personnel using the facilities of gardening. And there were gardens where people could go and actually plant and produce vegetables and herbs and flowers, which were then sold or used in the cafeteria, or they could just go and sit in a quiet garden environment, away from noise and away from hassle, and just enjoy some quiet time in a safe space. And these, for the sake of argument, are the 5 most important factors that this charity has identified in terms of what is valued by and adds value to its target beneficiaries. So let's see how we might use these criteria in terms of positioning maps. The first thing we do is to use these criteria to create different positioning maps with these criteria mapped together in different combinations. There's no right way to do this, but just here's some examples. So we might look at how our charity compares to other charities in this sector against the criteria of cost, whether it's chargeable or subsidised, and whether it offers a safe space or counselling only. We might use another combination of criteria, which is fixed schedule versus 24 hours 7 availability, and whether it's personalised or a standard offer. And we might use another pair of criteria, which are chargeable versus subsidised against a fixed schedule versus 24/7 availability. So the point is, there are no correct methods or correct ways of combining these different benefit axes. So use all the different combinations and then position your charity against your competitors in the following way. Let's see here how our charity compares with our competitors on these maps. And again, if you remember, our charity is represented by the red circle, and there are 3 competitors, a green, blue and yellow competitors. So here's how we position ourselves against our competitors in terms of chargeable versus subsidised and safe space or counselling only. This is how we are positioned on the middle map about fixed schedule or 24/7, personalised versus standard offer. And this is how we position against the criteria of chargeable versus subsidised and a fixed schedule versus 24/7. So again, you can now start to see how we compare with our competitors against different criteria which are valued by and add value to our target audience, and what we're trying to see is where we are exist, or where we're out of competitive contacts. We want to be in a sort of white space on these diagrams, or where we could move to be providing better, higher levels of value. So for these three positioning maps, let's see what they enable us to think about, how we might strategically reposition ourselves to create competitive advantage in ways that are valued by and add value to our target markets. Let's start by looking at the first positioning map on the left. You can see here that we and our competitors are all clustered in the top left-hand quadrant of the diagram. We're all offering safe space services, but we're all doing it on a chargeable basis. So what we could seek to do, if it were possible, is to reposition ourselves and differentiate ourselves further, because we would continue to offer our safe space, but if possible we could provide subsidised support and subsidised service delivery for certain people, certain beneficiaries who aren't able to pay the full charge out cost, such as our competitors are offering. In the middle positioning map, again, you can see we're quite nicely positioned. We are away from most of our competitors. We're in the same quadrant as our green competitor, but we're offering 24/7 services, unlike the blue and yellow competitors in the middle map. But what we could try and do is move slightly to the left in terms of more personalisation of our services, and if we moved to the position indicated here, we really would be quite distant from our competitors. We'd be offering a personalised service on a 24/7 basis in a way that's better and different to our competitors. The final map is the one here on the right, and as you can see, we're at a slight competitive disadvantage because we have a fixed schedule of service offers, whereas most of our competitors are to the right of the central axis, and most of our competitors offer a true 24/7 service, which is something which we're, let's say, not doing today. So what we could do here is try and move into this bottom right quadrant, in which case we'd be offering a subsidised service for some of our beneficiaries and offering it on a 24/7 basis. So it's improved our position versus fixed schedule versus 24/7. We've moved to the right on the map, but we've also moved down to the bottom right, and we're offering subsidised service delivery. So these are the ways you use a positioning map strategically, and how you use a positioning map correctly. Map out you versus your competitors against different pairs of these axes, and look at places you can move to which either distance yourself from your competitors and or provide higher degree of service delivery and a higher degree of value to your clients and target audience in ways that they would value and in ways which adds value to them. And that's how to do positioning correctly. So here's my advice on the steps you need to take to complete the targeting and positioning activities as discussed in this briefing so far. Once you've segmented your market and your stakeholder groups for a given stakeholder group, so for example clients or donors or sponsors or volunteers, decide which of the three targeting strategies you will use, i.e. undifferentiated, differentiated or concentrated, as I described in the previous section on targeting. Once you've done that, you can start developing offers, and you need to think about within those offers, in terms of positioning, what are the criteria of those offers, what are the things that are valued by and add value to your target market, and how can you build those into your offers using the positioning map approach that I've just gone through with you. What you need to do on the positioning maps, as I've explained, is go into clear space, find ways where you exist in areas that are valued and add value to your target markets and are not close to other competitors. And if you are completely surrounded or in the same segment as other competitors, try and reposition on the positioning map, as I just showed you. Move to a space where you're clear, you're in white space, clear of your competitors, in a place on the positioning map that is value add to your target market. And in later briefings, I will talk about how you get there and how you establish that position using a range of tactics. And that's the subject of the later briefings when we get onto the topic of tactics. I'm now coming on to the final section of this briefing, which is all about brand management. Now this is quite a long briefing, so I will understand if you want to pause the briefing video here and stop and have a cup of tea and a biscuit. And I'll see you back here if that's your choice in a few minutes. Otherwise, let's press on and look at the concept of brand management. Branding, like strategy, is again one of the most misunderstood and misused terms in marketing today. So let's look at some of the jargon and some of the words that go around branding and brand management. People use all of these phrases. They talk about the brand essence or the brand image or the brand reputation, the brand equity and so on. And you can see the terms that people bandy about here, most often inappropriately, when they're considering the whole concept of a brand. So let's look at some of these terms and some of these concepts in a little bit more detail and see what branding is actually all about. The first issue, as in the case of strategy, is there is no one universally agreed definition of what a brand is or what branding is all about. But let's look at some of the things that some people have said. The first definition of a brand comes from the American Marketing Association, and they say that a brand is a name, term, sign, symbol, design, or a combination of these intended to identify the goods and services of one seller or group of sellers and to differentiate them from those of a competitor. So it starts to talk about the concept of competitive differential advantage, but it indicates that in their opinion it's done through things like the logo, the colours, the sign, the symbol or the design. And that's one definition that talks about the differentiation and gives an indication of one approach to achieving it. The next definition talks about this concept of differentiation but doesn't go into the detail about how one might achieve it. And this definition says the role of the brand is to create a position of differentiation in the mind of the consumer so that the brand is understood and clearly differentiated from the competition to encourage purchase. So again, it's focusing on this concept of differentiation and advantage, but in this definition it doesn't actually indicate how you might go about achieving that. I like this definition from Philip Kotler, the American marketing professor who we've met on a previous briefing, and he says a brand implies a relationship between the product and a customer. And I like this concept of a relationship between what it is you offer and the people who receive it. It connotes a set of quality and services that the customer can expect. Brand loyalty is built by meeting the customer's expectations or even better, exceeding them. So this talks about delivering the value, the service to the customer, and starts to think about the concept of a relationship between an organisation and its target stakeholders, and makes the important point that it's always a good idea to exceed the expectations of the recipient when you're exchanging value. I'll now come to my second favourite definition of branding. It comes from my friend Professor Paul Fifield, who's a professor of marketing and a very successful marketing consultant. And Paul says, every successful brand has a role in the customer's life. Things without a role are peripheral and are just products and services. Stuff. Who cares? Find the role, understand the importance, and design your brand to fit it. Easy, he says. And this is very good because this talks about building products and services that actually address the point in my big question: what is it that you can build that adds value to and is valued by your customer? What is it that does something better and different from your competitors? What is it that isn't just stuff? What is it that really makes a difference? And if you can design products and services and position your organisation as an organisation that delivers value-added stuff to the consumers, the target market, the beneficiaries, then you really have gone a long way to achieving a strong brand. This is my favourite definition about branding, and the author says that there are a lot of views about what a brand is, often taking a tactical advantage. And as you'll see as I expand this definition, that the author is taking a much more strategic approach. And what he goes on to say is, my firm belief is that a brand is a cluster of functional and emotional values that enables an organisation to make a promise about a unique and welcome stakeholder experience. So it's not only the functional stuff of what it does, but also about how it makes the recipient feel. And it's that combination that provides the value add and the differentiation that answers the big question. And what he says ultimately is brand management is promise management. And that comes from my friend Professor Leslie de Chanatonnay, who's an absolute genius at marketing and brand management, has written many books about the subject. So that's it. Just spend a few minutes thinking about that, and then think about what promise does your brand make to your target markets, to your target stakeholders, and how well do you deliver against that promise? What are the functional things you're delivering, and how are you intending to make the recipient feel? We've talked now about some definitions of branding, but let's look at the benefits that a strong brand brings to a charity or other organisation. The first point is shown at the top here, is that a strong brand enables you to differentiate yourself and make it clear in the mind of the target market what it is that makes your brand better and different from your competitors. And I'll give you some examples of these on a later slide. It also enables recognition or recognition at a distance. Companies and organisations and charities spend a lot of money about their brand image, their logo, their colours, their font, their business cards, their website. And a strong brand has coherence across all of these areas. And I'll talk about this a little bit later on in one of the tactical briefings when I cover marketing communications. Though it's not so important in charities, it's very important in commercial organisations that a brand and its identity can be registered, whether it's the logo, the colours, the packaging, or the words that are used, or the tagline. It is possible to register and protect your brand for competitive copying, or in fact from counterfeiters. A strong brand means that you can transfer your identity to other products and services as you develop them. And if you go back to the Ansoff matrix, you think about where we are today with our existing products and our existing markets. If you go into a product development strategy, having somebody identify and valuing the products you have today, if you launch a new range of products using the same colour, the same type, the same name, the same identity, the same logo and so on, people have an expectation that product A is very good, and here's another product from the same organisation called product B. This is also going to be good because the brand attributes will transfer as you develop new products. It also creates what I've called here psychic value, which is how you expect to feel. If you have a luxury product or a value product or an everyday product or a product you've been saving up for, it has an emotional impact on you and changes the way that you feel. And this goes back to Leslie de Chanatonnay's definition, which says that a brand is not only the functional benefits that it gives, but how it makes the recipient feel as well. And finally, a strong brand, though not so relevant for charities, a strong commercial brand enables you to charge a premium price, whether it's a watch, a car, a mobile phone, or any other high-end luxury premium brand. You could charge a premium price because the brand has that strength and that reputation in the mind of the target audience. So these are 6 benefits of strong branding, most of which apply to charities. So let me break up the presentation at this point, because I know it's quite long, and let's have a little bit of light relief while I give you and introduce you to a brand power quiz. I'm going to ask you a number of questions here, and at the end I'll see if I can read your mind and predict the answers that you might have given. So in terms of brand, what brand would you think of if I asked you to think about a luxury watch? So whether you write this down or just keep it in your mind, what brand would you think of if I asked you to think about a luxury watch? What brand would you think of if I asked you to think of a mobile phone? What brand would you think of if I asked you to think about a safe family car brand? Who would you think of if I asked you to consider baked beans? Or cornflakes? Or a social media platform? Let me see then if I could read your mind. I'm guessing that many of you would have said, to answer these questions, for a luxury watch you would have said Rolex. For a mobile phone, I'm guessing an iPhone. A safe family car, I guess many of you might have said Volvo. Baked beans, I guess everybody says Heinz. Cornflakes, probably Kellogg's. And social media platform, well, you have a choice here, but I'm guessing that you said Facebook. Let's see how well I do trying to predict or guess your responses when I ask you the same sort of questions about charity brands. So let's start here. What would you think of if I asked you to think of a brand or a charity that helps former service personnel? What brand or charity would you think of that helps people deal with the problems associated with HIV and AIDS? Which charity do you think of if I asked you to think about UK animal welfare? Or child protection? Or famine relief? And finally, human rights. Let's see how I think you might have answered these questions. In terms of helping former service personnel, well, that's possibly tricky because there are two that spring to mind. The first one is the Royal British Legion, and the second one is Help for Heroes. And I'm guessing that many of you would have chosen one or two of those. HIV/AIDS, I'm guessing that many of you answered the Terence Higgins Trust. For UK animal welfare, I think you probably all would have said the RSPCA. Child protection, again, it's a bit tricky, but I guess you would have probably said either the NSPCC or Barnardo's. For famine relief, probably Oxfam. And for human rights, I guess you might have said Amnesty International. So you can see already that there's just a very strong association for certain brands with certain charity sectors. Let's see if the same thing works both in charities or for commercial organisations. If I just show you a piece of the brand identity, the logo in this case. So see if you can identify which parts of the logo or which brands are represented by these little snippets of the brand's logo or corporate identity. That's the first one. This is the second one, slightly trickier, but I guess some of you will get this. The third one I think is going to be easy, and I think the fourth one should be pretty straightforward too. So just to run down those, the top one of course is BMW. The one with the panda's ear and the eye is the World Wildlife Fund. I guess everybody got McDonald's and a corner of the Golden Arch. And the final one, which I guess many of you use every day, is of course Facebook. So again, there is clearly very strong association between certain sectors, certain brands, and certain logos. And this is the sort of strength that one needs to build for your own charity. And I'll talk about how you might do this later on in the briefings where we cover tactics and particularly marketing communications. One tactical thing that you often see associated with branding is a concept called the value proposition, or the USP, which stands for unique selling point or unique selling proposition. So let me spend a couple of slides talking about what this actually is and how you might develop one for your own organisation. The value proposition, or USP, is a short and succinct statement of the bundle of benefits that a product or service or offer will deliver to a customer or other target stakeholder. If you like, it's a short, succinct answer to the big question. So I'll encourage you in a few slides' time to think about how you might develop a value proposition or a unique selling point or USP for your own organisation. I'll give you an example of one brand here that has a very strong USP, and in fact it's a commercial brand called Tom's Shoes, which is an American shoe brand, and their shoes are very widely accepted in America, where they're mostly sold, because they're quirky, comfortable and light, they're good value shoes, and I think it's a Californian company. The fact is that their shoes are made 100% from recycled product, so this is a very attractive appeal to many consumers because it's made of recycled product and therefore has a limited impact on the environment compared to other shoe brands. But the most important thing is Tom's Shoes' association with charity, because for every pair of shoes that a consumer in America buys, Tom's will deliver a new pair of shoes to a child in need somewhere in the world. So for every pair of shoes that are purchased, a free pair of shoes is given to a child in need. And this makes a very strong, unique selling point, a very strong value proposition for Tom's Shoes, which increases further its reach and range, and in their case, commercial success. Let's think for a moment about the benefits and why it's worthwhile to create a unique selling proposition or a unique selling point or a value proposition. Because if you don't stand for anything in the mind of your target stakeholders, then you stand for nothing. There's no particular reason to use your brand or your charity's product or services. You're not different, you're not better than anybody else. A value proposition is a powerful and emotional statement that invokes feelings in the mind of the target, that validates a customer unmet need or experience and instills a confidence that this unmet need will be totally satisfied by your brand. This goes back to the definition by my friend Professor Leslie de Chanatony that says a brand should deliver both a functional and an emotional set of values or emotional benefits to its target stakeholder or its target user. And finally, it is the expression of the key benefits offered by the charity to its target stakeholders. It's what you can say that answers the big question. So on the next slide, I'll give you some tips on how you might craft a USP based on some experience and some work that I've done a few years ago. I'm going to give you some questions here that I've developed over the years from working with charities, because often they say to me, well, I understand the concept, I understand what you're trying to do, but how do we actually get started and create a working and a worthwhile value-added USP? Well, what I've got here is 7 questions you can ask yourself to see how you might start to build the USP, the value proposition, to address and support your brand. And the first question is, how would you answer the question? The organisation is most proud of its ability to do what? The second question is, unlike other charities, we do what? The third question you could ask yourself is, the organisation improves people's lives by doing what? Or ask yourself, why do your most loyal stakeholders use you? Why do your most donors, sponsors, volunteers or beneficiaries engage with and support your charity? What is the first thing people think of when hearing the charity's name? And just refer back to the quiz that I gave you a few slides ago. Could you get your charity into a position when in the sector that you are working in, that is your charity's name that becomes top of mind and the most prevalent answer when people are asked about a question about a charity that does what you do? Question 6 is, why was the organisation started in the first place? What were the needs and wants in the market against the target stakeholders that the charity was put in place to do when it was first founded? And finally, what needs and problems was it set up to solve for its stakeholders? And just, if you spend a few minutes thinking about how you would answer these 7 questions for your charity, it'll help you go a long way to think about and pick out the sort of nuggets of information that would help you to craft your USP, or your short, succinct answer to the big question for your charity. And I hope you find this list useful. So the action that I think you could do now to start building your brand and your USP is using the USP concepts that I've identified on the previous slide and slides. Develop and agree a USP for your charity, and you could do that by holding discussions with internal members of the organisation, whether it's trustees, managers, the chief executive, volunteers or members of staff, to get their opinion, and also undertake research with the external stakeholders, with your beneficiaries, with your donors, sponsors and volunteers, and get their opinion on what it is that makes your charity better and different. And once agreed, craft a USP and then use it in future communications and campaigns, which I'll talk about in a later briefing. So that's my recommendation for you, and the things you can do to start thinking about how you could build a strong brand. I'll just wrap up this briefing by talking about the next stage of the programme. So in the next briefing, we're going to move there now from the strategy section to the first of a number of briefings in the area of tactics. So we've covered a situation analysis, where are we today, objectives, where are we going. We've finished now our discussion of strategy, which is how we get there, and tactics talks about the specific detail of how you implement that strategy and answers the question, which way is best. And that's the area we're going to cover on the next few briefings in this series. So this has been quite a long briefing. If you have any questions about any of the points covered here, if you'd like to give any feedback about this briefing, then please do drop me an email to my address, which is peter.rees@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll answer your questions or comments as soon as I can after I've received them. I'd like to finish as usual with a concluding quotation, which is as follows. Stay true to your values. That's why you were successful in the first place, and that's how you make incredible things happen. And this comes from a gentleman called Rafe Offer, who was a senior marketing executive at the Coca-Cola Corporation. But it really is my message to you as members of charity organisations. You really do make incredible things happen. So big respect to all of you. So I'd just like to wrap up by saying thank you so very much for your time and going through this briefing with me. I know it's quite long and I covered lots of points, so do feel free to go back over it and review any points and areas that are new to you or you're not familiar with. And if you do have any questions or comments, then as I say, please feel free to email me. I'd just like to thank you very much for your time. You do a fantastic job in the charity sector, and I'd just like to wish you good luck, good marketing until we meet again for the next briefing. Goodbye for now.